Hi everyone, welcome. We'll just give it a little bit while longer whilst people are joining. I just ask that if the interpreters can give me a thumbs up that everything is okay from their end.
MC, you seem to be muted.
Very much, thanks. I was just trying to figure out some things with the interpreters there. So I think we're good to go. Welcome everyone. Well, there's a few more people joining, but we'll get started. Thank you for joining us today. Happy to have you with us for our cross-regional dialogue on Younger South Feminists, our calls to action. My name is Mary-Claire Price. I'm with Resurge, Realising Sexual and Reproductive Justice Feminist Alliance. And yeah, just wanted, before I pass you over to the moderators, just wanted to go through a couple of logistical things as we get more and more used to these online ways of working and spaces. So this event is being recorded and it's also being streamed live on YouTube. We'd ask that you, if possible, can choose a language now to go to a particular language channel so that the interpreters can know who is needing interpretation, and also for when we need interpretation, that there's not a scramble for translation. So yeah, if you could select an interpretation channel now if required. I think that we are pretty much good to go. We just need to we're just waiting for a couple more people, but just in terms of, we're really glad that you can join us today, and you know, we really are looking forward to having a dialogue with you. And you know, we've got plenty of time for this conversation. We've got a full 2 hours. I know that there's a few familiar faces, friends, allies, but also some new ones joining us. So you're very welcome, and we really want to ensure that this is a safe space for everyone, and that this is a dialogue, and we really welcome your inputs and your interventions, questions, analysis. This is why we wanted to kind of make it more of a dialogue as opposed to a panel, etc. We would also ask that, you know, we prioritise the space for younger South feminists. So really would love to hear from younger feminists in the South, your reflections and your thoughts and concerns and calls to action. And also to welcome our trans and gender non-conforming and sex worker colleagues and friends, and you are also most welcome, and this is a safe space for all. So I think that's it in terms of logistics. I hope everyone's been able to switch to the right language channel. So I'm going to pass you over to Nana now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining and welcome to the cross-regional dialogue. It is such a pleasure to be with you today, though I would have really appreciated to be in person, to have this dialogue in person. I miss all of our gatherings around CSW and other advocacy spaces. And one last logistical note that I think is an important thing, since this dialogue will be is live streaming actually, is that if anyone feels like they want to share and don't want to have themselves unmuted, or they don't want to have their names attached to their intervention, please feel free to, can you hear me now better? Okay. Please feel free to message me privately or to everyone their intervention or their questions, so that we make sure that we share it with with everyone that is with us today, and also try to protect your identity in any way possible. So yeah. So as Marie-Claire said, my name is Nana. I'm a research member. Research is a South-led feminist alliance working on sexual and reproductive justice. Our members are under 40 years of age, and we come from 14 different countries. We do work on interlinkages between sexual and reproductive justice and economic and ecological justice. And our other thought leadership is on criminalization and how effective are the punitive measures set in place in the face of sexual and reproductive violations. I'm a feminist researcher based in Cairo, Egypt, and I welcome you along with my colleague and member of research, Ines. Do you want to introduce yourself, Ines?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. This is Ines, and I'm a recent member. I don't know if I'm a recent, like 1 year member of research, but one of the newest family member of research. I'm from Libya, and I've been engaged in the feminist organizing in Libya for maybe 9 years now. So I'm very excited to be with you. Yes, as Nana said, I wish that this was in person, but we will try our best to get, to get out of it the best we can. Thank you.
So just to give you a little bit of background of the cross-regional space, it's basically it's a space that we've always been keen on arranging with other accomplices and allies. Like this time, we're with much delight doing it with AWID. We're holding the space with AWID. What we've been doing over the past years around CSW and other advocacy spaces at the regional and national and international levels is basically we arrange for small gatherings for South younger feminists, where we get the chance to reflect and think together, and also prepare together and see how we can move forward with any agenda put on the table. And the reason we do this actually continuously is because we realize how absent such feminist practices in those spaces. And we like, I mean, coming from a very personal experience, how much we feel disarmed in those spaces if we're on our own by ourselves. We don't have, I mean, especially when it boils down to your only individual skills, your social and political capital, organization resources, and so on. So just imagining coming from a grassroots organizing environment, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into the vicinity of the UN headquarters and how cold it can be on your own. So we've kept each other's company over the past years. In the past, we did hold such spaces with Diva for Equality in Fiji, and we did so also with Asinas Feministas and YAFD in Africa region. So we've been doing this over and over again and in different formats. Today, it's really more about looking at what we have by far in the BGN Plus 25 review process, and also how we've been contributing in different ways in our individual, organizational, or feminist organizing capacities within the action coalitions, and where do we stand, what are our priorities, and so on and so forth. The reason we have decided that to actually have it as SWANA-led, and SWANA is our new replacement for the MENA, and maybe this would go a bit into our decolonizing pieces of work in the future to explain it further. This is not the place in particular, but SWANA stands for Southwest Asia and North Africa. And the reason we've been super excited, myself and Ines, in leading this space has to do with how actually CSW in particular and UN Women in general turned a cold shoulder on the region and how our realities and our struggles as feminists on the ground have been shifting so violently and harshly with no change or amendments and procedures to really accommodate our needs and our aspirations. So, and this might sound very familiar to other feminists, especially based in the South. And but again, we were just very enthusiastic to focus on the Southwest Asia, North Africa region, and we will take a moment, a couple of moments actually today to reflect on how UN Women went business as usual without really charting out different maps for us to navigate or to listen to our concerns on how the engagement with the Beijing process have been very exclusionary to younger feminists in the region, and how they've been really reluctant in engaging with us and hearing from us instead of, relying fully on interventions coming from regular goers from developmental CSOs or to CSWs, I mean, or from other organizations who are in alignment with the states at the national level. So, for instance, Beijing Plus 25 review process at the national level did not reach out to human rights organizations, individual feminists or groups, and UN Women has single-handedly led the process, the review process regionally in Tunisia. And the local office of UN only relied on CSOs that has been aligning with the state politics over the past few years. And when I did raise this concern in the last CSW we've had in person in New York, I've had from one of the representatives of the CSO division a very, how do you say, a very sympathetic response, and she did confirm that my country is such a special case. And then I asked again, so what were the special procedures put in place since everyone is obviously aware? However, I did not receive any response, and I think my level of engagement has since then been really, only inclusive and only kept and cornered in the international advocacy spaces. And with COVID, this changed a lot. So beyond informal invitations by different Action Coalition leads to feminists from the region to step in and to, I got distracted by Zoom, to step in and share their reflections and their priorities. Those invitations are not sustainable, and you could get to be in one space, but never in the follow-up to it, and how unsustainable this is, and how very discouraging at the same time to keep trying to find opportunities and ways to engage with the process. And I'm also looking at gatekeepers from the region. So it's not only UN Women, and it's not only international civil society organizations or human rights organizations and feminist organizations. It's also gatekeepers from the region that have been in place for so long and only rely as their peers from the north on tokenistic checkboxes when they try to engage youth or younger feminists in the process. So now looking at the bigger picture, it's also it sounds familiar in many ways in other regions, and I am very aware, as we all are, that the whole process has been very disjointed, very hard to follow, and very difficult for organizing feminists and organizations, especially based in the South, to really keep an eye on, given the fact that we have much limited human resources, financial resources to allocate to just contributing to the process. And I'm thinking now of, like, I'm not sure if everyone has had the chance to check the recent circulation, the document that has been recently circulating from the Generation Equality Forum Young Feminist Manifesto. And it's very interesting, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it. And I think it's a very good documentation of how tokenistic youth engagement and younger feminist engagement been by the UN Women and also by Action Coalition co-leads, and of course private sector, and how the slot allocated. And I think of that as even that opportunity was not available for a lot of feminists in the Southwest Asia, North Africa region, because of the criterion that was put in place, actually limiting the participation for youth to be a youth-led organization, which means in a lot of countries in this region, that it's almost impossible to take part in it, because it's either you don't have enough financial resources to actually follow through international procedures, and at the same time fulfill your and feel grounded in your own national context. And also because it's almost impossible for a lot of groups to register, and this has a lot of political reasons, it has a lot of bureaucratic reasons, but again, those were not taken into consideration. And those are making it a very inaccessible space and a platform for younger feminists in the region at large. Again, looking at the reason why we keep on, we feel the urge of actually holding such spaces for other younger feminists coming from the South is, and today coming from the Swana region, is basically how even within feminist organizing spaces at an international level, there are no intentional efforts put in place into actually trying to exacerbate the region's, feminist voices and actually engaging with the region. And it is always interesting how in our usual regular updates, the region is missing from the map. And despite having the solid political reasons for the absence of the region from the map, there were not any intentional feminist efforts put in place at the international level, where a considerable amount of resources, human resources and financial resources is available compared to other spaces, other organizing spaces in the region, to actually engage with feminists from Swana. And I would be really interested to see at the end of it, actually who got to be involved and engaged from the region continuously and sustainably from the start to end. And I think that is it for why we're doing this. What is the intention behind the space for today? And I would like now for us to maybe, I'm not sure how big the crowd is. I'm not sure if we should break into rooms, or it would make more sense to have a casual conversation, right? Do you agree? Okay. So, well, the intention was basically to have us break out into rooms and discuss regionally how we've our engagement with the process been like. But I think it makes more sense to have a casual conversation. So what I would do, I would paste in the chat box, and I'll also read it out loud. what we are trying to do. So first, Marisol, my colleague from research, would help us by, she just pasted a link to a Jamboard. If everyone please click on it, you would be directed to an external link where you would share with us, if you feel comfortable, where are you from, in the sense of like how, in what country did you engage with BeGene plus 25 review? And this would give us a sense of who's in the room, since we're doing this virtually. And Marisol has also shared with us her screen. Thank you. So basically, well, first, if we can have a sense of the country where you engaged with the BeGene process, and also for you maybe to write a sentence or two, and also and afterwards we'll have a chance to for everyone to speak, to unmute themselves and talk about this, their experience of actually organizing during COVID in CSW last year, or the UN in general, the UN in general. We want to look at the UN and CSW as one of the organizing spaces we have. So how was the engagement under COVID? So is that clear, or should I type it in the chat box? The steps we're doing this. So yeah, so if everyone just write in the blank text boxes on that link that Marisol has just shared, where they based and how did they engage with the UN and or CSW during COVID. I think I'll just repeat it again in case anyone has just joined us. If you please can go to the link. Hold on, I'll just paste it here. Paste it in the chat box right now, and share with us how and where you've been engaging with the CSW of last year and UN in general, especially with the BeGene plus 25 process. And if you could share a couple of impressions of how that felt like, and how was that actually under COVID-19.
if you are unable to use the Jamboard, please feel free to add your input to the chat, and we can just add it on for you.
There are a couple of more minutes for you to share on the Jamboard or type into the chat box. How was your experience engaging with CSW of last year and Beijing process in general under COVID? All right. I will read. It's definitely open for everyone now to roam around others' notes on the Jamboard and see what others have been up to. I'll just read a couple, and I will invite in other attendees to share with us their regional reflections. One of them is basically Region plus 25 Regional Forum in Europe. 2019 was a hard space for sex right workers. And the other one was I've been engaging with the CSW through my classes. As someone who has never been involved with the CSW in any way before, well, welcome. I have nothing to compare it with. It's been a similar process to Zoom classes and learning. And there's also an intervention from Canada working to get support for the ILO 190 harassment at work from our provisional and federal government so Canada could ratify. I'm now actually Ines will be sharing maybe a couple of reflections on the youth engagement in the region, her personal experience with youth engagement in the region. Ines, are you here?
Yes, I am here. Yeah. Thank you so much, Nana, for this tour, and thank you everyone for laying down your experiences, your different experiences, whether either in your own regions or within international and transnational spaces. And I think it's last year has been so confusing for so many, but especially for the Beijing plus 25. I've joined the process. I think my experience with it, I've joined the process actually in 2019 in the Tunisian consultation. And that was part of the different regional consultations that UN Women have organized for the Generational Equality Forum at that time, that was supposed to happen last year. And I think as a young feminist, of course, I was there throughout the different, sessions in the consultation, but I think I lost touch. So like, as I think Nana commented on that there's no really follow-up or monitoring. I completely forgot about Generation Equality Forum by probably the end of the 2019 year. I reconnected again through actually research when I joined research with the Beijing 25 process, but it was really mainly throughout the different events, and I felt like even regionally, I've attended maybe one other regional space organized by the the African Union, which was a consultation with North Africa only. So it was really, I felt that there's a lot of empty space for organizing, especially for our region, North Africa and Aswana in general. And it was really, and as I said, it was really confusing, and I couldn't really follow up what's going on. And I think when we talked a little bit about youth participation within space, there's a lot of tokenistic ideas when it comes to young people, but young feminists participating within the process. And I'm not sure, like, Nana, would you, like, particularly because I thought like maybe we can discuss together about like what are like the challenges or similar challenges that young feminists within the different regions are finding when it comes to participating within the Beijing process. And then maybe after that, I can even talk more about that. And I think we were supposed to do them as a group, but I think we can just. And we
Yeah.
can just open the discussion for everyone to speak about what are the priorities that you find as young feminists within the process.
Yes, absolutely. It's now an open space for everyone to unmute, in turn, to unmute themselves and share their reflections or to tell us more than what was just shared on the Jamboard.
Yeah.
Chantal, do you want to share with us how was it regionally in Africa?
Yeah, thank you, Nana, and hello, everybody. So I'm Chantal from Rwanda, the eastern part of Africa. And I say I've been engaging with CSW for more than 8 years now. And last year, 2019, when we're having the Regional Forum for Africa, I think just like in the past years, the participation of young African feminists has always been limited, and it has only been possible due to support from other feminist organizations, other feminist international organizations, because being there and participating there physically, it costs money, it's expensive, and so I think I wouldn't really feel like it has been because of like the participation from the rest of Africa, apart from the Northern Africa, was due to more organizing and all that. I think it has been due to different factors, including the availability of maybe funding from some organizations to have young feminists from those different parts of the country in those spaces. But even still, we still have very strong and very wide intergenerational gap in terms of knowledge, in terms of resources. Even in those spaces, I think my experience has always been and is still getting to work together with the older generation on these different issues, being taken seriously even when we're contributing different ways in terms of language, in terms of issues. Being understood that your voice matters. I think that's a struggle that we still face, that I still face, that we also faced at the Regional Forum in Africa. So I think, yes, maybe there has been increasing the support of younger feminists to be in different spaces, thankfully to different feminist organizations, but the struggle in having meaningful participation of the young feminists is still ongoing. And it's something that we need to discuss and share and from different regions and understand how we can support each other and find ways how to work together so that our voices are really reflected and taken seriously in those spaces. So thank you.
Now the floor is open. If anyone feel like they would like to share more at length with us how the regional process was like, and even after onward from the regional process, how was engaging with the BG Plus 25 process in general and action coalitions over the past year was like during the pandemic. I think Marie-Claire, yeah, okay, I'll speak up. I'm sorry. I tend to faint. My voice faints. Sorry. Does anyone from Europe feel like sharing with us how were the dynamics and the interactions at the regional forum like?
I'm happy to share. If there's no others from Europe, can you hear me okay? Yeah, I seem to, oh, thank you. I think for, at least from the European side of things, in October 2019, there was the Beijing +25 regional review in Geneva, and the civil society forum that happened there, you know, there were very strong priorities coming from that space, from feminists in the region, but also across various different groups. And I think that the calls to action from a regional perspective, and what were the emerging and urgent priorities and needs from within the region were very clear. But despite these priorities that were coming from civil society and feminist activists, that were really trying to highlight the current, or at the time, the trends and context, there was very little mention or prioritizing of some of the really urgent issues in the region around the rise of the right, neoliberalism, austerity, and there was only some voices in the room, particular feminist voices, that were really kind of prioritizing or strongly voicing the need to address some of the most marginalized groups, including migrant women, etc. So there was, there was this lack of addressing in that space some of the kind of structural inequalities that we're saying, or some of the communities that are facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, and what that means in the context of Beijing +25. So there were some gaps, but there are, there is work happening within different national contexts and also regionally that are filling those gaps in terms of priorities for Beijing +25. And I think that one of the most important things that the point we're at now in all of our regions is that we were going through these regional review processes for Beijing +25. We had really clear and urgent issues that we need to address in our regions. Since then, since late 2019 and early 2020, when these regional reviews were taking place, we now have these same issues being compounded and exacerbated by the pandemic. And I think that there is an opportunity here for a regional level, but also within the Beijing +25 process, the action coalitions, the generation equality forums, the youth journey spaces, to really have a transformative a focus on real transformation and what we can do to address some of these really urgent issues in all of our regions. So that's from Europe. I don't know if there's others that want to share also.
Yeah, there is Nino from AWID. You had your hands up. Do you want to step and share with us?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of got hooked on the request of people speaking from Europe. Well, I come from Eastern Europe. I might not feel like the best person actually to kind of reflect on the dynamics in the European region, because I actually have not been very engaged in formal processes, but I maybe can share a bit of AWID's experience of Beijing Unfettered, which is parallel process to, well, we always say that Beijing Unfettered has connecting points to generation equality forums, but it's very independent and parallel process for young feminists to, bring this voice of radical visions of how transformative changes could happen. And I can say that, well, we are talking to young feminists across the world, especially in the global south, and I can identify like two categories of young feminists. I would say there are lots of young feminists who are engaged in generation equality forums and Beijing +25 in general. And I think this manifesto that the young feminist Europe and other folks as well brought together really reflects on the experiences of young feminists who are engaged in formal processes. For example, questions around resourcing, questions around and concerns of private sector engagement, or lots of concerns from trans and gender non-conforming folks who are the GEF processes and are raising lots of concerns about how they've been discriminated. That's something we hear a lot. And then there's another thread and a huge, I would say bigger group of young feminists who refuse to be engaged in formal processes, and they have, well, lots of reasons as well. For example, speaking of SWANA, we hear that there's a question around language and inclusion. Well, probably it's more like exclusion because of the translation issues. And also the manifesto also speaks about that one. Honestly, there were some concerns around not having translation into Arabic, for example, or in Spanish, which obviously is kind of closing a space for young feminists to participate. Yeah, I think that there's a really important kind of young feminists in general are trying to connect to the processes that are happening internationally, but probably not all of them are very suitable for also the politics that we have. So I guess that's also like a really good connecting and like good reflection point, right? To see if there is actually a space for radical young feminist visions in generation equality forums, and if yes, to which extent. Also, I think maybe later on I can also share a bit of what we are hearing in terms of priorities from young feminist organizers through the Beijing unfettered process. But yeah, this is like, I think my point is that there are young feminists who are part of these processes, the formal ones, and have some concerns. And there are also a way bigger group of young feminists who are really trying to connect but cannot find a good connecting point to formal processes. And I think we should like kind of break down why that happens. So yeah, sorry for jumping to and fro. I'm also happy to also share maybe the link here about Beijing Unfettered in case you're interested to learn a bit more. And maybe also would be helpful to share the link of the manifesto from the young feminists who are part of action coalitions or the national groups, young activists.
And also invite everyone in for AWID's Beijing Unfettered event. We'll share the link in the chat box. It's an extension of this conversations that we're trying to together to hold with younger feminists organizing around Beijing and CSW. And thank you, Nino, for your intervention. It's really important to also be aware of how AWID is engaging and employing all of those resources for younger feminists to have a real engagement than just going business as usual. And I think the next point of intervention that you brought up is actually coming up in Inas's bit of the conversation on what are the emerging priorities. While we are not necessarily willing to tag along with the leadership priorities, however, it's really important to be aware of them and also see where are the quote unquote diplomatic intersections that we can set up to fill the gaps of this prolonged process. Ines, would you like to walk us through the next bit of the conversation?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nana. And thank you so much, Nino. I think, as Nana said, many of your points about exclusion, accessibility challenges, but also what Nana said, the leadership priorities versus our local or national realities. Within the process, it seems it's not matching. And it's particularly when it comes to accessibility, I found it very true when it comes to Arabic language. And this is something, a comment that I have been giving to all of the meetings I have attended, especially coming from a country that it's really small percentage that we speak any foreign language. Like we don't have any second language but Arabic, beside the indigenous languages, of course. So I think for this section, we will speak more closely about what are the priorities that young feminists within the different regions find important at the moment. The different regions are very dynamic and changing, but also particularly now in a pandemic, what does our priorities look like? Do we actually have energy to talk about these different issues that the AC, the 6 action coalitions are bringing? And we talked about the feminist manifesto, and this point came across that one of the recommendations is to redesign the 6 ACs. Do we have a space? Do actually the UN have a space to listen to these young feminist realities and actually redesign these priorities according to ours? But before we can speak about that, I really want to give a space for you to tell me about your experience when it comes to challenges, but also what are your priorities? What are the priorities within your feminist organizing, but also within your region or even your country context? So maybe I can give the space for per regions, or maybe anyone we can just speak up since it's not so many of us.
I can go.
Yeah, please go ahead. I cannot see the name, but please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm from New Zealand, but I'm part of 2 different organizations, and I've been also working mainly focusing on refugees across the region, but also with LGBTQI women and pretty much across this region. And I think one of the common things that have been said before is also, like the lack of visibility of the feminist ideals within the LGBTI community. It can be problematic because sometimes it's perceived that those ideals are not compatible with the LGBTQI movement. And there is a lot of negative views about that in all those spaces that the LGBT community are gaining. So that's on one side. And pretty much that obviously causes a lot of complications. And it's a particular concern because in this region, we have a big portion of the refugees of the world are located in this area of in the Asia and Pacific. And so it is something that I've been working in, and I find a little bit problematic because these issues are often not addressed properly and adequately. And I think this is something that we all can discuss. And what I could say that is something that is very relevant to this region is the lack of representation that women have in business or in positions of power of leadership. It's one of the problems that we find that is prevalent and is actually quite complex. And so this is something that we've been trying to harness and to find ways in which we can interact with businesses and also at state level, because this is a problem that is systemic and happens everywhere in all these countries. So this is one of the problems that we were also discussing when we had that meeting in Bangkok last year. And also, obviously, the pandemic has been affected a lot of those initiatives. It's creating a lot of more complications for us to kind of create this kind of ongoing work that often is hard to keep going when you just have these conversations on Zoom. And yeah, so I think that's pretty much what I would like to say for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. And I think these are very, very concrete, important issues, especially when it comes to visibility of LGBTQ within your within the Beijing process. I think intersectionality, even I hear it a lot within the spaces, but it's really failing in terms of participation of younger feminists from different identities, but also in general. I will give the space for Nino because I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry. I'm in parallel having a situation with a postman. Again. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. So I wanted to share quickly some of the priorities that we've been. Oh yeah, everything happens at the same time. I'm so sorry. Some of the priorities that we've been hearing from the conversations we had through Beijing Unfettered, because just for small context, we had workshops in English, Spanish, and French for different young feminist communities who, well, for example, usually would not be engaged in these processes because, well, there's the translation issue always. So there were some intentional language spaces created, and we voted for some of the key priorities that young feminists want to have deeper conversation. I will not go into too much details. I will just point out that there were, for example, 4 of the biggest topics we heard. One of them was climate crisis and climate justice and intersection actually to SRHR, and lots of conversations around policy change. There was also body autonomy, integrity, gender identity, sexuality, and pleasure. And feminist movement building and disrupting and dismantling systems of oppression. So, and later on, we will also share way more about the details. Oh, I'm so sorry for talking too loud, so too fast. So yeah, we will definitely share way more in details, but these are 4 big topics that we heard as a general priority of young feminist movements who in some way are connected to GFs, but are also fully independent. Just pointing this out because I think this is important, but also speaks a lot about the fact that these topics are very important, not only per region. So these are not region specific, but seems like it's very important for young feminists across the global South. Yeah, I'm gonna stop it here and continue with the door, but yeah, and sorry again.
Thank you so much. No, please don't apologize, and you can speak as much as detailed you want. I think it's very important to hear your insights. Anyone would like to share their thoughts according to the region or their national context about their priorities?
Can I say something?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Too much, but this is like my favorite part of the discussion, actually, when we come to talk about priorities, because usually the only association I have with priorities when it comes to advocacy spaces is basically you set your priority and you know what they call it, the trade-offs that you have. So like, as you set them, you know which ones you're gonna give up first and what are your red flags, and which I think is one of the things that we need to be very critical about. I don't understand how this slipped through over the years and was kind of normalized in any feminist organizing space. The moment that you set the priority is the exact moment that you set the red lines. And I mean, I understand the strategic aspect of it, is that what I don't understand how quickly we give in, how quickly it's just much easier and more diplomatic to tag along what those member state representatives are willing to, sign off. So I think it's one of the things that also made younger feminist spaces a place for me to be able to critically think and look at the world from a different lens than what I'm being served, basically. But when it comes to priorities, I think with an intergenerational gap lingering on in the region and specifically in Egypt, it makes it sometimes that when I'm being asked what are the priorities from my country, it makes it very hard to think of anything because there is no collective conversation. Like, it's sometimes much easier to just list something that is trending and it makes it reactionary. So like you would have the associations easily being put as sexual harassment or FGM. And this is maybe because it's either historical or like FGM as a harmful practice, or maybe sexual harassment because we had this, social phenomena exploding in front of us. So I think like also back to Swana and back to how this region is really not being represented accurately, is because like how reactionary also the interventions coming from individuals in those spaces. And sorry, I talked too long.
No, Dana, but absolutely right. Like, it's very hard to, especially in our context. Like, I think this is something that speaks to me as well. If we don't have a collective conversations and we don't have spaces to speak about our priorities, it's very hard. It's so easy to take this bat to tag along with whatever is the buzz trend. Either this year is it gender-based violence, or is it political participation, or whatever it is. So it completely speaks to me as well. I will just, before I will give the space to Elena to speak up, welcome everyone whoever joined. Right now we're speaking about the young feminist priorities across regionally when it comes to the Beijing Plus 25, how these priorities in our national and regional context that actually live up or actually relate to the current action coalitions or leadership priorities within the Beijing process. But also I want to remind everyone that we are, who just joined, that we are recording this, and that our session is being currently streamed on YouTube. I can see this live. So just if you don't want to disclose any information, this is of course according to you. Elena, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I actually just want to combine a little bit of the reflections that we heard before about young feminists and the disengagement that some of us experience. And there is one particular issue that I find that is very horrendous and that is still happening today. And actually it is one of those letters of the LGBTQI movement, in particular the I. And I think one of the persons speaking here was mentioning the bodily integrity. So I find that problem particularly problematic because only 2 countries in the whole world protect intersex people from suffering all these multiple interventions, because it's not usually just one, it's usually many interventions, and that include horrible things throughout the childhood and everything that gets is derived from those interventions, which is pretty much no matter how you see it and no matter what convention or covenant you look at on that, it's a horrendous violation of many multiple human rights. Yet I haven't seen that there is much has been done. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because FGM is something that was highlighted very well. And it's something that we've been working so hard, and actually we can even see the numbers decreasing significantly. So we still have 200 million women that are living with FGM, but the numbers of the prevalence of females or young females experiencing FGM has decreased at least 50% in the last 10 years. But in the case of intersex people, and this is in particular for intersex women or girls, these interventions haven't stopped, and there is nothing stopping, nothing really helping these persons from stopping this abuse. And this abuse has been normalized, and it has been normalized in such a way that even when we know it's a horrendous violation of multiple human rights, we still kind of like are not really making this problem visible. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just want to read what Ninu said, bodily integrity was one of the key priorities we heard from Young Feminists through Virginia and Pater Project, definitely. Such an important point. And I want to also remind everyone that there's interpretation available, Arabic, French, and Spanish for anyone. And for Portuguese, we don't have, but M6, if any of the participants can support through the chat. I can see that someone, Sibu, you had your hand raised.
I'm sorry, I had started typing instead because I think the point that I was trying to make, I was just trying to build up on what Nana had mentioned. I think I also get a bit shaky when it comes to us discussing around priorities, because historically it's more so about the majority in the space than it is about majority in the space and the values that they hold in the space than it is about actually what feminist movements would prioritize. And also when we talk about prioritize, it also makes me kind of shaky, because then we start talking about which operation should be tackled first and which one should be the important issue before we get to other issues. I get the strategic direction, like Nana has said, but I think we should also try to always remember that while we are trying to prioritize, we normally leave out the minority in the space. So as young feminists, we should always be cognizant of that fact and try as much as possible to be inclusive, not just in name only, but in priorities as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure if Elena, is this new, but I can see your hand raised, but I'm not sure if this is like new or it was from before.
Oh, that's from before, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Anyone would like to intervene? Maybe until someone wants to speak, I just wanted also now speaking about when Sipu mentioned the priorities about inclusivity, and I think I found it one of the things that I found it very tiring. I mean, not only in the Beijing process, but within the UN processes itself, that we are spending so much effort to talk about, for instance, like participation of young feminists, you know, like, oh, we need to be participating. And I think we spent a lot of effort to be in the table or to be within these processes. But at the same time, when it comes to priorities, it's like we have to pick and choose. It's like they're doing a favor. Okay, you're already here within the space, so you have to pick and choose whatever it is within the table itself. So we don't actually, make our own priorities, so within that conversation. So I find it very hard to split what we should choose exactly within our advocacy, strategies locally or even regionally. So
I just wanted to mention, I'm so sorry.
No, don't apologize.
So, and I think this is it's not too much, it doesn't have to do too much with the space in terms of what happened in these forums, because these forums usually have this kind of ability of keeping diplomacy as an element that help us all to kind of like have conversations that are quite peaceful. But in the feminist arena, pretty much the one that you experience out there in the streets or the one that you see on social media, there is a growing movement of trans exclusionary radical feminism that is becoming quite problematic, because it is creating multiple layers of actually self-discrimination that I think it is important to find ways in which we can find mechanisms for dealing with that, because our movement has gone so far and we've done so many different things and we have advanced so much. that I think this can actually cause more problems than anything else. And I would like to know, what do you think that would be the best way for us to handle these very complex issues?
Definitely. It's a really good question, and I'm pleased anyone who would like to comment on Elena's question. After, I'm going to give space to Chantel to speak, but please, you're welcome to discuss. Chantel?
Well, thank you so much. It's also in line with what Ariana has just said. Issues around diplomacy and choosing what needs to be spoken in such spaces, which is something that we all know that is not really new, not only in the regional and global spaces, but also at country level. I think we often find ourselves in those traps of finding what is the correct language to use in different spaces. So in 2019, when we were in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for the regional forum on the Beijing Plus 25, this exact thing really happened, where the young feminists were organizing and had put together a position paper with really key issues. There were about 10 issues that they wanted, that they have to be part of the key messages. And in the end, UN Women came and said, we don't want no more than 2 issues to be brought by the young women to be part of the platform. And we're just all frustrated and wondering how all the people that were there, the young women and girls issues on the continent, can only be summarized in 2 issues that had to be taken for consideration, not even for adoption. So it becomes really difficult. And I think also, as my experience at the UN in terms of advocacy and language, we have grown to kind of find ourselves self-censoring, because right now, as we're doing CSW language and advocacy negotiations, we find ourselves already not, for example, wanting to put issues like LGBTQI and comprehensive sexuality education, only because we know in the past those languages are not going to be accepted. So kind of tend to feel like it won't help if we put these languages in front, because from experience, these languages are never considered, they'll be removed anyways. But also that results into self-censoring, where we don't even try to push further the language beyond what we have. So we're working in this kind of framework that kind of limits us, and we have gotten so comfortable with it, which is really a problem. But then my last point on this whole issue about diplomacy, what language to decide to put forward or not, what priorities matter and which don't. I think as feminists, mostly young feminists, we need to know that we cannot solely rely on these regional and global spaces for our issues to be validated. That's why organizing and mobilizing feminist movement building needs to be beyond those spaces. We don't have to wait for the African Union to say we can have comprehensive sexuality education. I think we can also organize alternative spaces. And I think, for example, this is what we're trying to do, because otherwise we won't have this kind of conversation at the UN or at the African Union. So alternative ways of organizing and pushing forward are really crucial. And we don't have to rely on what comes from the UN or the African Union or other spaces to feel that they are validating our experiences. We need to find different ways to work in different spaces and on different platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantel. I think everyone is agreeing with what you're saying. It's so true in terms of like how we are toning down ourselves as activists, but also creating our alternative spaces within the Beijing process. And I want to give the space to Nino again. I know that you have the. Please go ahead.
There won't be any doorbell anymore.
No, please.
I agree with Chantal, because I think what we have to remember is that we primarily come from social justice movements, and we organize in movement spaces, and movement spaces are organizing in a way different way, right? Speaking of diplomacy, the language, censorship, like how we relate to each other. I think like nature of our original and like primary organizing and activism, and remembering that is very important. And when we step in these spaces, especially when they are multi-stakeholder spaces, I think it's very important, but also it might seem a bit out of the space and a bit radical probably, because expectation of us, especially of young feminists, is that we will, there are the rules and we have to play those rules, and that there's a game, right? But we always can disrupt it. And probably this is where I want our energies to be channeled on a very personal level, and definitely mobilizing beyond formal spaces. Because eventually biggest part of the achievements when it's about gender equality and all the issues that we are raising of people on margins happens through movements, right? And mobilizing huge amount of people around these topics. So there's a huge power. I probably might, that's the speech I'm giving is about how important it is that we are doing our activism in our local communities and in movements. And obviously UN and formal spaces are always very important and very good spaces to advocate, but definitely beyond that, and connecting across movements is also something to really look at and explore way deeper.
Definitely, Nino, definitely. I just want to say that whoever wants to speak, before actually going, I will go to the next question of this session, the next question of this intervention. But if you have any pressing comment that you would like to make, please raise your hands. While I want to read, Elena says that 2 points has unintended consequences such as leaving minority women further invisibilized, which is like comment on Chantal and Sibu. How do we then influence these spaces, especially around this time when we are relying on virtual platforms? These platforms are notorious for ensuring that issues remain silent. And I think Nino kind of, in a way, she answered some of these, your question. And yes, Sibu, see how safe are those virtual spaces for activists to engage while they are in their countries because of COVID. Thank you so much, everyone who intervened in this section. I'm receiving a logistical note to have a break of 3 minutes before actually continuing our conversation together. So 3 minutes, you can have your coffee, you can stretch your self, within your space, and yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. We're continuing our session. Whoever just joined, we're recording this session and it's streaming on YouTube. And I think before going to the next question, maybe if anyone has any reflections or thoughts. Yeah. Can everyone just, whoever just, if you came back, can you please just message in the chat box that you're here so we could start? Thank you, Monica. Sachini. Yeah, I have to always remember that we are in a virtual space, so make sure that everyone is here before we start. Thank you, Nana. Thank you so much, everyone who just came back and here already. So before we move to the next question, I thought maybe if anyone has any further reflections or thoughts or any pressing comment
Are we still on a break?
No, we just came back. Chantel, welcome. So if you have any, yeah, feel free to join the video as well. Open your camera if you like, of course. And if you have any reflections or comments that you like to share before we move on to the next question. Either you can speak or feel free to just even write in the chat box.
Hi, this is Sachini from Sri Lanka, and I'm also a member of research. So, I mean, I was listening with a lot of interest, and I think one of the things I was reflecting on was that I think for many years I've been very intensely and maybe too intensely engaged in intergovernmental and multilateral spaces, and then I've had the privilege of taking a step back for a couple of years, and I think there's this thing of listening to all of this and it all feels a bit alien and alienating, like, like there is a lot of like, language and processes and like a lot of things that we're listening to which are familiar, but like it just feels very like, like I feel disconnected. But I was wondering, like, those who are really like still very much actively engaged with these processes, like what is it that drives you, like what is it that makes you like still be with these processes, like either you're very new to it, or like, like Chantel said, like, someone who has been with it for like nearly 10 years, but then what is it that like keeps driving you to it? And I think if we are to imagine alternatives, like, like not just within Beijing, but also like outside of these kinds of like multilateral spaces altogether, like, what are the ways that we can like mobilize, then like spending our energy, like how do you feel about that? Do we have enough energy left to create alternatives, or like, is it all going into like catching up with these processes? Like, are there any thoughts about like if we are building towards alternatives, how do we manage that?
Thank you, Sachni. I think these are two important questions, and please feel free to answer, comment on Sachni, because I think it's important. Actually, this is a really good transition to our next question, which is like, what is next for Beijing 25 for us? What keeping us actually engaged in this process? But do we have energy or to create our own radical, imaginative, alternative space? Anyone? Mm-hmm. Nana?
Yeah, I just wanted to share some. I mean, obviously, I don't have any answers. It's just sometimes it feels like it's a toxic relationship. Like every year, we ask each other like why we're here, and we keep coming back. But personally, I think it's how much of a gap of information of like what happens at those global spaces in locally. Like we don't get to know what are, and I mean, it's not about just knowing, it's actually the fact that how much we lose of history in memory because we don't know, like no one tells us, no one. And I mean, it's also about how, for example, we're expected to participate as effectively as other organizations that do have the resources to allocate for those international advocacy spaces. So like, for example, now, and we were just actually, I talked about this casually before, but like, how am I supposed to be staying in my country, doing my actual full-time job, following through all the document changes and markups and contribute to them, and at the same time, and this is like, and in other international advocacy organizations, you have an advocacy officer, their job is basically just doing this, you know, like, I mean, I don't know what their TORs are like, but I mean, it's basically what they do during CSW is following CSW. So I mean, how are we supposed to, and what are those feminists in those leading organizations are actually coming together to find out a way with us of like how we can make this a little bit easier on everyone, so that we're not exhausting our resources, which are very little, and at the same time we get to actually contribute to the process without having to panic every March of every year and then have a radio silence throughout the year before we start talking again in HLPF. I mean, what is that? Like, how is that even contributing or echoing any of the insights and the arguments that are coming from grassroots organizing and feminists on the ground, not in cold hallways of UN headquarters? I mean, so yeah. Oh, sorry, high level political forum.
Yes, yes. Yes, Nana. I couldn't agree more. Anyone wants to comment on Sachni or even Nana's reflections? Anna?
if I may, and I'm so sorry for taking up so much
Yeah.
space. That was one of the
Apologize.
yeah, I'll like jump into intro. That's a really, really important point, Nana. And we saw that in this manifesto, lots of young feminists who've been engaged in youth task force or are young members of action coalitions and this national advocates, like I'm not sure how the full proper abbreviation for that is, but they were pointing out the importance of resources and the fact that there are advocacy officers, there are like people hired, full-time jobs existing, and people have like capacities to do this job, as opposed to young feminists who are not compensated for this work, and indeed it takes a lot of time. And it's very important to acknowledge that this also is co-creating the dynamic, right? When it's about the formal processes and high-level advocacy in general. So yeah, just to second that this is something we also have been hearing a lot, and the manifesto is also proving that. And it's very important that this manifesto is written by people who were participating in GEF and Beijing Plus 25 for 2.5 years almost. So these reflections are critical, especially having in mind that after Generation Equality Forums, we all will move our attention to action coalitions, which are 5-year processes. And yeah, like maybe this is a very strategic moment to stop, reflect, see how GEFs went, what was done well, what could be done otherwise, especially centering young feminist experiences and voices as we do that, and think how to move forward, because not just 5 years of action coalitions, but overall, as one of us mentioned, the multilateralism, that's something really important to consider, right? Like, what is the future of it? How will it look like? And how will we relate, having in mind the experiences we have right now? So yeah, I promise. Rest of the things I will just comment in chat box.
Yes, definitely. I know that Chantal wants also to comment, but maybe if someone else has any further reflections or answering to Sechni's question or any comments. If not, then maybe Chantal, you have the space, please.
Hi, sorry again to take the space, but I wanted to also share and reflect on what Sachini said, but also basing on my experience. Like I said before, when I started going to CSW, for instance, in 2013, at that time, I felt like I came in naive with a lot of passion, and I felt like this is a space where I'm going to finally voice my issues, and the government is going to listen and act on them. It wasn't just a few years after that I realized that that was completely wrong, that actually there can be other barriers. I think at some point I really went through a burnout of constantly asking myself, why do I keep coming here? Why do I have to fly all these hours to be here? Why can't I spend my time at home and working with the women in my country, where I can see the real change and the connection with the communities? And so I think it was after many years that I personally, I felt like I need to find something that actually brings me here, otherwise it does not make sense. And that's why I feel like sometimes when we say, what are we doing here? Why do we have to be in these spaces? Sometimes it cannot be just about the we, it can also be a personal decision about where you see your role contributing or not. Like, for instance, I've over the years learned that me being lucky enough to be on the Rwandan delegation and me having the privilege to be in the negotiations room, this is something that I can contribute to the feminist movement space, where I can get the information that is really needed so that people that are working on language and other issues can contribute. For somebody else can be something else. One of the other things that, for example, now resonates to me more than ever is having to connect with young feminists in those spaces. And having that space where we can talk, where we can discuss, where we can do like almost we're doing here, but in person, which is not something that usually used to happen when I started going to a CSW, that I really lacked. So I also find that as a way to engage, to use that space, to hold the space. And so I think there are many different things that can work for different persons depending on how they feel or how they can contribute to that. It cannot just be the whole movement deciding to be there or not. But also in general, I also kind of always reflect, like sometimes you question, like if we're not there, the issues that we're trying to advance, what would happen? Would things be better? And almost like what Nana said, the interest to know that you also want to ensure that the history of women's movement and organizing is not lost in the hands of those that are constantly opposing us, kind of drives you to feel like you want to be there because there are also people who can't be there. So I think there are different reasons and different spaces and entries for different people. It can be a personal decision, but it also has to be based on how you feel you'll be best contributing or what you're learning or unlearning from that space, for example. Thank you.
Thanks, Chantel. I know that MC, please go ahead if you'd like to make, you raised your hand.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ines. Unless, I mean, I'm slightly curving off a little bit here, but I'm going a little bit backwards, sorry, to something that our colleague from New Zealand, I'm sorry, I don't think they're on anymore, mentioned around some of the fault lines within our movements. And I think that moving forward within this Beijing Plus 25 process, but also within other advocacy spaces and our own organising spaces, whether that be at very local, national level, regional feminist organising, or in the global advocacy spaces, there are some major fault lines that we need to address. And because these are already coming out in the, for example, Beijing Plus 25, and they're all coming out in our own context as well. We all have 100 different examples of the ways in which that trans exclusion is happening in some feminist movements in our countries, the exclusion of sex workers, the erasure of their voices and narratives and stories, and some fault lines around, deep fault lines around the ways in which gender-based violence, for example, should be addressed with such a, there is over the last few years in many of our countries such a focus on the law and putting more money and funding and focus into the law and criminalization and punitive measures to address gender-based violence or sexual and reproductive health and rights violations, for example. But many of us are also working on looking at what is really effective and what's the alternatives to just to focus this kind of focus on a carceral or punitive response. That is also a major fault line amongst within a lot of our movements, within women's movements and feminist movements, those who are really who have and continue to really support a focus on a solely or heavily focused or a heavy focus on punitive response. So I think that I just wanted to not just bring that back to the space, because I just think that this is something that is growing and growing. These fault lines are deepening and growing, and it's just something that I think, and there's many more than the ones that I shared examples of. But yeah, and our colleague from New Zealand had brought it up about the trans, well, I'm going to say it, TERF, ongoings within some of our countries' movements. So. And I definitely think it's relevant for the advocacy spaces where we're mobilising in and our own organising that we are doing.
Thank you, MC. Thank you. Very, very insightful. Before we go to the next and last question, I wanted to answer Sachini, but also comment about like what keeps us, interested in continuing this process. But coming from my context where transnational feminist spaces or transnational organizing is very like there's a gap, like there isn't a lot, like in Libya, for instance, and we're relying so much in our relationship with the UN, but also we're thinking about it from perspective that our government would never listen to civil society versus would listen to the UN. So it always, like for me at least, I feel this is the first purpose. It's more like, in how can we strategically engage with these power dynamics, which is like for me it's ridiculous, but I feel this is like, that's the need. I think it's more about like, how can we leverage the UN, how the UN is perceived by our governments in terms of advocating for women's issues or not. And I always feel like these spaces in general are like, Nana commented about gap of information. Most of the times, like last year, I spent like chasing my energy about what's happening. What is the event? What is the AC? What is the forum happening or not? So most of my energy goes on to find out what's going on. And I always feel like this is intentional. I think I could say that probably in the last 2 years of my activism, I started finally chasing the sources of this information. So I think Chantel and many others commented on that. Like most of the times, I don't know how to find out which space to go in or not. So this kind of gap of information I feel it's intentionally being complicated and not accessible for particularly younger activists. And I'm going to just go on to the last question, which is, what is next in terms of feminist organizing, in terms of our organizing in Beijing 25 plus 25? And what are the spaces that are currently existing for us to hold all this conversation? Because I always feel like this is really rare. I'm really listening to this, and I always find it really, really rare to have such a frank conversation about what we think is the obvious. So I know that the Mexico Forum is happening very soon. I don't know, after just CSW. And I think there's a lot of exciting, I would say, exciting opportunities as well when it comes to alternative spaces. Nino have commented on some things that they're doing in our research ourselves, but I think it's good to hear from you what's going on for this year for us. I want to read some of the comments. What do you suggest these spaces be more inclusive and accessible? I have been working on gender and caste-based violence at regional and national level for the last 7 years now, and I never had the opportunity to be part of these international spaces before this, mostly because I was not even aware of these spaces. There are no many grassroots organizations who are doing extraordinary work but lack accessibility to talk about regional pressing issues. So very important questions as well. And to connect to what MC said about criminalization, there's also the fact that documents like the PPFA put a lot of emphasis on criminal justice and my English, carucial approaches to rights violations and procedural distractions make it much harder to engage with its substance and suss out fault lines. Beijing Platform for Action. Yes, thank you for the acronym. So please go ahead, whoever wants to intervene or comment on the question. Anyone? Yeah, the question of what's next. the question is, what is next for our organizing for Beijing plus 25? Nana, I feel like I see, it's only you I see, but I'm not sure if you want to be having a comment or...
There are other people.
I can see your face. Please.
I guess what's next? I mean, personally, I would be following through the Generation Equality Forum in Mexico. I mean, if I get accepted, I'm not sure how the registration works. But I'm still waiting for someone to tell me to step in. I think for me personally, this is one of the last attempts to understand like if I should be following CSW anymore, or should I give my attention to another platform that I can feel more tangible outcomes coming from, even if minor ones. Or have a substantive, like contribute substantively to those platforms. But I mean, like, I might also change my mind. Who knows? Depending on the political moment when the Generation Equality Forum is over. I'm completely clueless about the action coalitions. I keep receiving a chunk of informations and then they're cut off, and then I get them back because like it depends on like who thinks of me when they are making the invitation list, but which is also another very critical point, I guess, of like how we can sustain our engagement in this process if it really depends on who thinks of you individually or thinks you're important to be in this room, beyond having a tokenistic checkbox of like, oh, we don't have anyone from this region. It would look much better having someone with, yeah, I mean, even feminists do that. So, so like it really depends on like if I'm a cool person to be invited to the party or not. I don't think I am, so it's fine.
You're very cool. Please, if can everyone speak louder? I think I'm not sure if this is an interrupter, but I think it's good to speak loud whenever we make interventions. Maybe we could have a moment as feminist and gender social justice movements to reflect on which spaces we have found useful, and which way and where we can step away from. Definitely, I think we need to have this conversation. Yeah, I think we need to have a moment and find this conversation just like right now. And MC, please, I can see your hands. Yeah, please.
Oh, sorry, I was going to go after others. It was just to say, like, are these spaces reflecting the movement that's happening in our countries, in our local areas, like around everything from, I'm just thinking about the UK context, you know, what's happening around policing at the moment, and gender-based violence and racial justice. And, you know, are these processes and spaces and platforms such as Beijing Plus 25, like really reflecting the shifts that are happening and the transformation that's happening and the movement that is garnering and happening in our context? And if not, how do we make sure they are? I don't have the answer. This is hopefully, these spaces are definitely, you know, so important for thinking about how to do that. But yeah, just popped into my head.
Yeah. Anyone would like to comment or just, I can read, and you know, obviously it's an individual decision to engage within these spaces, but having an informed decision would help with or without these spaces. Atsuman, Sachni, would you like to say your comment? I can see your camera open, so I don't want to put you.
No, I think we kind of missed Suman's question, but I feel as if it's a really, I mean, there's no one single answer, but I think my experience from Sri Lanka, like also being part of South Asia, is that there is a lot of like internal like movement, intra movement, like politics around who gets to engage in these spaces, and people have these monopolies over like CSW is our space, SDGs is our space. So like, you know, different people have these kinds of monopolies, and I think that's part of what we need to kind of like, I think, like discuss in spaces like this, where how do we kind of jump over that, like are there ways to actually just like skip that part and get to these spaces. And I think that's where like building these kinds of transnational solidarities would be helpful. Like how do we, like, because we said a lot about like, you know, not staying informed and like, you know, like not being kept in the loop, or like, you know, like people going silent for the rest of the year. But then how do we like also like within our these groups like create some of those channels of communication and like, you know, keep people involved. So like, yeah. And I think thank you so much for all the answers that came across to my very like simple question. But I think it was also to kind of like reflect on like, I mean, what Nino said, like, you know, not it, I don't know whether it's an individual decision. Sometimes you just feel as if this burden is on you to be there because like, you know, you see a lot of the kind of youth participation that you otherwise see if young feminists are not in these spaces. So I don't know whether we always get to like make an individual decision about it, but I think it's also been okay that maybe we don't really need to be part of these spaces. Like, you know, does that possibility and does that world also exist? I think just like worth considering, because there is so much agony in being left out but also being included. And I think like, is there a like, are there other ways of like being like, that was what I was trying to like, yeah, discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachni. Thank you. I want to just wrap up. I think just Nana kindly reminded me we have just only 1 minute, less than 1 minute maybe. But that was really wonderful reflections from you, very insightful, and for all the questions, but also for Sachni's questions. Nana?
I'm really sorry for the comments in the chat box and also the intervention from Marisol. But I can say this quick and we'll see if they will kick us out from this room or not. And then you can jump in, Marisol, and share with us. Thank you so much for coming in today. This is not a closing, just to let you know what happens afterwards. I will, myself and my colleagues in research will be writing this up based on the recording of the session. We'll leave all the names out just because it's really hard to know who doesn't want their name written for any security reasons. So we'll keep the content and we'll write a reflection and share it publicly, similar to this one. You can take a look and see how we're trying to keep a record of all the good conversations we have and also to help other feminists walking into those spaces to have a guide. Marisol and then Mary Kinney, you can, yeah, we'll start with Marisol and then you next, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Hopefully, yeah, we won't get disconnected. But yeah, I just want to say quickly, a little bit talking about what MC was saying in terms of how disconnected these spaces are around what's happening with the feminist movements at the national level. And in my mind, I'm of course thinking about the Generation Equality Forum hosted by the Mexico government and the response that the Mexican government has been having towards the feminist movement in Mexico, particularly, and, you know, around the policing, the police violence with the manifestations and the protests around the Women's March. You know, this just complete disconnect of the Mexican government calling themselves, you know, this feminist government, but at the same time completely disregarding the needs and the calls that are happening at the national level within the different and the diverse feminist movements in Mexico. So it is this disconnect is sort of frustrating and makes us kind of not want to engage definitely in these spaces because of this inconsistency. But it definitely gives a lot of reflections to think about why and how we want to engage in these spaces. Sorry, I was being quick because of the time concern, but sorry for the translators.
If I might speak before we go up, I really want to just say thank you. Thank you, and to encourage you young feminists to continue the fight. As part of the Associated Country Women of the World, I'm the UN chair, and it excites me and gives me hope that an organization that I've been part of for over 45 years, and an organization that has been doing advocacy work for women on women's behalf and women's rights for over 75 years. It is so good to see young, vibrant faces that are not just picking up the torch, but is moving the whole role of human rights for feminists ahead. And we need to keep engaged. We need to hear your voices. Do not think that you are in a disconnected space. The space you're in is vital for us to hear. So we know what's happening in different areas around the world, so we can support you and work with you in a collaborative way. We don't want to be your voice, but we need to hear your voice so that we can come alongside and support you in the role that you're playing, which is a vital role globally. And there's no part of our globe that has not been touched by the injustices that is happening to women and girls, and especially your age, your generation. And as a grandmother, I was so delighted to listen this morning and to be so inspired, because the future for my grandchildren is better because of you and the work you are doing. So I want to encourage you to continue, and if there's a way that we can support you, do not hesitate to contact us. But thank you so much and I look forward to listening back to the recording of your full session, and to be able to hear more of the work that you are continuing to do on the front lines. And that's what you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. One last comment, and I think it's worthy to leave the room with, coming from Western Sahara feminists contributing with us in the room. I'll just read it out loud, and that would be the last thing. We want to be within the feminist radical spaces of the global South, but we do not find any opportunity for that. I will get in touch. I know who you are, so welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.